Now, of course, the first question is, what is a cost function? A cost function is a function that includes fixed and variable costs. It lets you determine the cost of an output. Usually in the format, this is just an example, C of Q equals 45 plus 5Q plus 10Q squared. Now the 45, the 5, and the 10, that's just an example, but it'll always be something like C of Q equals some number plus some number times Q plus some number times Q squared. Now Q is always the quantity, what your output is, how many pieces of inventory you make or anything like that. Now the next question you might have, what are fixed costs? As always, I'm using the example C of Q equals 45 plus 5Q plus 10Q squared. The fixed cost is 45. So it does not matter how many watches you make, your fixed cost is going to be $45. This is just an example to make it simple. Now, fixed costs include rent, utilities, insurance, any costs that are fixed regardless of how many watches you make. The next question is, what are variable costs? Throughout this entire presentation, I'll be using the same function of 45 plus 5Q plus 10Q squared. The variable cost is 5Q plus 10Q squared. And anytime I'm with these simple cost functions, it'll always be the part where there's the Q involved. So the 5Q plus 10Q squared. Now, let's just take for an example, you're a watchmaker. So what are your variable costs? Your wages that you pay Bob, Joe, and Steve. The materials you use, metal, plastic, wood, we've seen it all. The packaging materials and packaging costs that you have to send your watches away. And any cost that increases with an output. So now that we kind of know what a cost function is, we're going to break it all down and put it all back together. As always, the example is C of Q equals 45 plus 5Q plus 10Q squared, and we're just going to use 5 as the output. So what's your fixed cost? The 45. What's your variable cost? As said before, the variable cost is the 5Q plus 10Q squared, which in this case is 5 times 5, which is 25, plus 10 times 5 squared, which equals $275. Now, your variable cost is $275, your fixed cost is $45. C of Q is the total cost. So what's your total cost? It is $320. Now with this cost function, you can kind of do a couple of cool things. The first one is the average total cost. What is your cost per unit? So first you have to figure out your total cost, which we've already discussed. But just to reiterate, it's C of Q equals 45 plus 5Q plus 10Q squared. We're going to use the Q equals 5. So your total cost is $320. So $320 divided by the Q, which is 5 in this case, is equal to 64. So your average total cost per output is 64. Then we can do the average fixed costs and the variable cost, the average of it. As always, we're using the example C of Q equals 45 plus 5Q plus 10Q squared, and we're using the quantity of 5. Now, I'm sorry that I keep on saying the same cost function, but it's just kind of to give you an idea. Once you have the format in your brain, you'll get it. I got an A in economics. So the average fixed cost is 45, which is your fixed cost, divided by Q. So in this case, it's 45 divided by 5, which equals 9. Simple mathematics. Then we have the average variable cost, which it could be a little more tricky to get, but still fairly easy. So the average cost, or the average variable cost, is 5Q plus 10Q squared. So we're using the quantity of 5, which is 5 times 5 plus 10 times 5 squared, which our variable cost is 275. To get the average variable cost, it's 275 divided by Q, or your variable cost divided by your quantity, which in this case is 275 divided by 5, which is 55. Now here we have a little conclusion. Your fixed cost remains constant. It does not matter if you make it 5 watches, 15 watches, or 30 watches. Your fixed cost will always stay the same. Your average fixed cost decreases with output because, like I said, the fixed cost remains the same. So if you divide it by 5, like 45 divided by 5, how we did it earlier, you get 9. Now let's say you make 10 watches. Now your average fixed cost is 4.5. Next thing is variable costs increase as output increases. It'll cost you a lot more to make 10 watches than it will 5 watches. More labor, more material, more packaging supplies. And your average variable cost increases as output increases. Same thing, the more you make, the more it costs. Thanks for listening to my video. I hope it helps. If you have any questions about this, please don't hesitate to ask me.